Hi everyone, this is Reed. Nathan and I thought that it would be appropriate before we begin this week's episode to issue a brief word of caution. Now, we still have all of the usual preliminary elements that you've come to expect and hopefully love, such as what we've been watching, reading, and listening to, as well as a brief discussion about the wonderful and powerful episode 5 of The Haunting of Hill House called The Bent Neck Lady. But following those, the film that we're covering this week, which is a Netflix original called Cam, does contain content of a sensitive, mature, and specifically sexual nature, as it deals directly with the online adult entertainment industry. While we approach the subject matter as honestly and sensitively as we can, we thought that discretion should be advised. As always, we hope this finds you well, and we hope you enjoy the conversation. Thank you for listening.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power!
You're listening to a podcast exploring faith and fear, what scares us and what saves us. This is The Fear of God.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Fear of God podcast. Here we find the holy in the horrific at the intersection of faith and fear, dissecting what scares us in order to find what saves us. We are glad you are here. Speaking to you right now is one of your hosts, Nathan Rouse. Typically with me is fellow host Reed Lackey, but he said something about having to break one of his rules, so I don't really know what that portends, although it does have a bit of an ominous air to it. But, you know, I trust Reed. He is an Enneagram 9. They do tend to follow most of the rules, so it is probably a big deal that he's breaking the rules. But we'll get the scoop from him when he gets back. In the meantime, while he's gone, I would encourage you guys, if you have not yet, you guys and gals, to go to iTunes. Leave us a rating, leave us a review, preferably of the 5-star and or positive variety. If you write one, as you may have noticed, if you've begun following us on Instagram, hello to those of you who may be new to Fear of God, as part of Fear of God 2.0 this year. We will post those. You know, we are doing a lot of posting over on Instagram, but specifically have been posting some of these reviews. We really appreciate the kind, generous words you guys throw our direction. It really does mean a lot to us. Would really appreciate, if you have not done that yet, your willingness to go and do that so we can recognize you. And hey, who knows? Maybe you'll leave a negative review and we'll post that too. Cause, you know, hey, we're just, it's equal opportunity here. Reed, you're back, buddy. You're back. You doing
Yes.
okay? It was a little weird to me. You were talking about breaking some rules. That's not really like you.
No, here's the problem. The rule that I broke was we were staying at this friend's house, and I went raiding in their fridge.
Uh-huh.
And Nathan,
Yeah.
I found some fried chicken.
Yeah, you found some fried chicken. Don't warm it up though.
No, I didn't, but I did eat it after midnight, and I feel so bad about it.
Yeah,
I broke
that
one of
is-
the rules. I broke one of my rules.
That
I
is-
ate fried chicken after midnight.
That is definitely a rule in a horror film. It is.
It's true.
It is. It's none of the rules in this horror film, but it is a rule in a horror film.
That's true. Well, I wasn't going to break any of the rules in this horror film, to be quite honest with you.
Well,
was
welcome to you, my friend. I'm glad to
Thank you.
I'm glad to see the effects of your post midnight cravings have worn off.
Yes.
See, I didn't know
Yes.
if you were making a Bird Box reference there for a minute. I didn't know what. It took me a second to calibrate to the frequency, but
It's an equal opportunity joke.
Yeah,
It's got all kinds of layers to it.
Multi-level. Reed, we are in the. I was about to say we're in the middle. We're actually kind of cresting the hill towards the the decrescendo, if you will. That's a music term, Reed.
It's true.
Um,
I'm not a musician, but I've heard it before.
You've got a little bit of musicality in your blood.
I play a little bit.
Yeah,
I play a little bit.
You dabble.
Mostly when I eat after midnight.
Right, you dabble. But yeah, we're in the middle of Netflix and chills. We've had a really good time. We had a really great time last week on Bird Box. We hope everyone enjoyed that and that we did not insult anyone by having a bit of fun with the Bird Box. I did get slightly concerned. I was like, man, we are going to obnoxious town for real on the Bird Box. You know, we aimed that little rowboat and we just went direct for obnoxious town.
No, it's true. It's true. Unless, I mean, we closed the loop on this pretty definitively in the episode. Like, Bird Box is entertaining. It has its flaws and we make light of them and have fun with them, but Bird Box is entertaining. And so yeah, go listen to that episode. It is, I consider it to be a lot of fun.
It is
we had a lot of fun recording it.
It is a lot of fun. It's hard to say how much fun will be had on this episode given this movie, but we are going to do our best to
yes,
you know, to have a robust conversation. I do anticipate that will likely happen.
I think so as well.
But before we get too far down the river, my friend, you know, it's been a week really since we've had a conversation of this nature.
Really?
And yeah.
A whole week.
Yeah. Wow. And there is something that's just been kind of burning on my mind, Reed, that I just got to know.
Well, what is it?
Well, my friend, I'm just curious to hear from you. Just like if you had to assess your current intake of these things, I would just be curious to know what you watching, what you reading, what you listening to. Read. What are you watching?
I don't know.
What?
I don't know if you've ever asked me that before.
No.
I feel very honored that you would ask me such a question.
Well, I feel like it's just a good question. I'm trying to get better in my middle years at asking good questions, you know? Sure,
I understand. Well, okay, so listeners who have listened to last week's episode on Bird Box, you'll know that sort of in the prep for that, we were kind of bandying about the this impromptu race that you and I had to the finish line on watching
to the blind camp.
Yeah,
to
the blind
camp first, right?
We were trying to see who could finish watching the top 10 listener-voted horror films of 2018 first, because I had seen Mandy and Revenge. At that time, you had not seen them, but you still saw a little bit more than me, and I remember distinctly a moment when I woke up. I woke up, like, you're 3 hours ahead of me, so time for you is, you know, you usually have a head start, just as life goes in the day. And I woke up, and, you know, as part of my morning routine, one of the things I will quickly do is just check some brief Facebook notifications. Well, as fortune would happen, when you pull up Facebook for the very first time, then, you know, your most common friend feeds are, like, right there. Recent things that they've posted are right there. And then sit right there. As soon as I pulled up the app, it said, you know, I forget what number film, you know, 7th or, you know, 49th or whatever it is, number of film of 2019, and it said The Meg.
From me.
I'm sitting
from
there,
me.
like,
Is that what you're saying?
From you.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
From you. And it said that Nathan Rouse was watching The Meg, and I'm sitting here, I'm like, that son of a so I was like, there is only one reason on the planet why that fool would be watching The Meg, and that is because he's trying to watch all 10 of the listener-voted horror films of 2018 before I do. And I think all I said on it was just like, wow, with a gif of Medea shaking her head. Or something. Yeah. And I was like, wow, okay, so this really is very important to you. So I just want to put it on record here, everybody, that Nathan Rouse won the race to watch all of them. He won. He watched all 10 of the 2018 listener-voted horror films of 2018.
Ahead of you.
He watched them
before you.
Before I did.
Frank and Nathan lives up to his name. My
Indeed.
2-year-old, one of her favorite phrases these days, she'll go, "I did it." So that's
Nice.
how I feel right now. Is I did it.
Oh, I did it.
So
That's
what's
very
funny
cute.
about that though is you actually ascribed a level of, I don't know, live chainsaw to me that is actually not inherent to that experience. It is really funny though that was the interpretation, because it's not, I mean, in your defense, it's not like an unfair interpretation. It is something I would be, that is something I would do. But what's kind of fun about that is, so yes, it does make me smile to think about the fact that you wake up in the morning and you're just like, having been editing Bird Box, which has this really great back and forth about my experience watching The Meg previous to actually watching The Meg. And then you wake up the next morning and I have watched The Meg. So lately I've actually been getting up kind of early. I had this weird experience. You didn't ask for this, but I'm gonna tell it to you anyway. But just you. Okay. So about a month ago, well, let's back up a little further. About 2 years ago, I started exercising early in the morning. Okay. So that routine is relatively set, but I've been kind of negligent on it at the top of the year so far. But on top of that, about a month to 6 weeks ago, on like a Saturday or Sunday, I slept pretty late for an adult with kids. You know, like it wasn't like late for like a college student, but it was late for me. And
Sure.
And I had this is going to sound so weird, but I got out of bed. The day had begun for my entire family. And it's like you just enter this day that's already in motion and had begun a couple hours previous or whatever. And I just had this like real negative association with that experience. It wasn't fun. I was like, in hindsight that day, I was like, I don't know that I liked the idea of sleep is nice, but the experience of not having a moment before the day was really kind of proved itself more of a turnoff than I expected. So something I've begun doing is, even on mornings when I don't get up to exercise, I will still try to get up pretty early to just kind of have a little, just, you know, whether it's reading a book, in this case it was watching a movie, just some time before everyone else, before the day has begun, because I do my work is one of these where it's hard to just turn it off. So it's hard to carve out real dedicated time that your brain isn't occupied with pressing things. So anyway, the fun of it was, one morning I was just like, you know what? Because I was trying to knock out a bunch of films before the Oscars. And then before this recording right now, I was trying to, finish the top 10 of 2018 horror movies that we had, offered a couple weeks ago. And so I was consuming several movies over the course of a week, more than my usual intake. And I was like, I'm just going to get up and I'm going to turn on the Meg. So at like 5:45 a.m., I'm like, I'm just going to rent the Meg. I'm going to turn it on. And so I'm just laying there on the couch with my iPad and watching the Meg. And, my wife comes down. She's like, you thought that was a stupid movie. Why are you watching? And I'm like, it is stupid, but I got to win. I'm just kidding. That's
exactly the extreme.
That actually did not
was...
happen. Yes. But no. So I watched the Meg super early in the morning. It really was. It was to be conscientious of the top 10. It was not to beat Read. That was just a happy byproduct of the ultimate experience. So it does make me smile and warms my heart a little bit to know that you got up and thought, that stinker. So yeah,
well,
in the spirit of that, go ahead.
Ahead. So no, why don't we take, I know we've already announced the top 10, but now, because last time we announced it, we had spent, at least myself, had not seen like half the list. There were 3 or 4 that you had not seen. So,
well, now for the record, I mean, did you finish?
Oh yeah, I watched everything.
Oh, you did see Overlord?
Yeah. I saw Overlord.
Oh, okay.
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I was able to watch all 10 of the top 10, and I figured we could just take a few moments here and maybe share some thoughts on the films we hadn't seen when we previously talked about it, and maybe how we might reorder those films from our listeners just on personal levels, if that would be okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I have a burning discrepancy of the total list, but I think so. The ones that I had not caught when we last recorded that finished my top 10 or my watching of the top 10 were Revenge, Mandy, and the Meg. And I mean, as a little touch point there, the Meg is fine. It was pure. It was entertaining. It was exactly what you expected it to be.
Yeah.
And in that regard, I'm not going to criticize it. It was entertaining. That said,
well, why don't we real quick, just for those who maybe didn't hear the announcement, why don't we just real quickly, I'll rattle it off from 10 to 1. So number 10 was Revenge, number 9 was The Endless, number 8 was The Meg, number 7 was Mandy, number 6 was Overlord, number 5 was Upgrade, number 4 was Hereditary, number 3 was Halloween, number 2 was Annihilation, and number 1 was A Quiet Place.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, of the ones that were remaining for me, of the Meg, Revenge, and Mandy, I think the latter half of the list. Well, the only one that would really change dramatically for me from this list is Revenge. I loved Revenge, and
Revenge is great.
Sincerely, looking at this list, the top 3 was A Quiet Place at 1, then Annihilation, then Halloween. Revenge, if we're talking percentages, it's by a nose, but Revenge might beat Halloween.
Oh wow!
Which hear me sounds like I'm sliding Halloween. I don't mean that. Like,
no, I understand.
I found Halloween thoroughly entertaining, but in that previously existing IP kind of way too. You know what I mean? So from a pure originality, sort of ballsiness for a movie about a badass, woman done wrong, ballsy movie. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think for pure, just like taken up in the story they're telling, Revenge really had a strong effect on me.
That's great.
I think again, Mandy, you've said it before when you dissected it, for all of us. It's an insane film. It just is purely insane. I think its style is its winner. For me, I was, and hear me, like in a world where we dissect it on if we ever do an episode on it, I think there's probably a lot to say. Personally,
sure,
I just didn't know we were getting a murder revenge story, and her murder is so graphic and gross and sad. Like that part was just kind of a turnoff for me, and it kind of affected my overall appreciation, except for stylistically, it's just bonkers. So
it really is.
What about as you finished out the list, are there any real notable like things that escalated for you, or that you would
for the most part, other than like a placement here or there, I would definitely, for my personal list, I would put Annihilation, I think, at the very top, just edging out A Quiet Place. But I loved both of those movies for different reasons, but so much that placement really doesn't bother me. The rest of the list, I'm pretty okay with. The Endless would rise up pretty high.
Oh, I forgot. I didn't even.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about your experience of that.
So I had seen the 2 previous films by that directing pair, that pair of friends,
right?
And their names escape me at the moment, but I had seen Resolution, and I've seen Spring. And while I enjoyed both of those films, neither of them did I enjoy as much as I enjoyed The Endless. I really dug The Endless.
Which one precedes The Endless in terms of story?
Resolution.
Okay.
As soon as so I can tell you this because it's about The Endless. Spoilers for The Endless, everybody. So the guys that he runs into at about when there's about a third of the movie left, and he runs into them in that cabin. One of them's chained up, and they're having this conversation. Those are the main characters of Resolution. Like that's who Resolution is about.
Oh wow.
That's the entire, like, their story, including that identical cabin. I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. That is where Resolution takes place.
So the main leads of Endless are not in Resolution?
They are. The main leads of Endless are in Resolution, but like they're only in like a scene.
Okay.
Whereas those guys in that cabin, that's who Resolution is about.
Gotcha.
So
okay, cool.
And yes, Resolution gets my high thumbs up. Everybody should check that movie out. It's different and it's great. I really, really love Resolution. But to speak more specifically about The Endless, I think this directing pair has such a fascinating way of evoking things that make you feel like you've seen more than you have. And that's what The Endless really did for me, is it made me feel like I was witnessing more than what I was seeing. I feel like they clearly have these films on a rather tight budget, but their effects savviness is really strong. Yeah. their ability to do so much with what is clearly obviously limited finances, but they are able to draw so much out from it. But the thing that really drove me for affection for The Endless was the ideas that it's scratching at. Ideas are really, really captivating and fascinating. And so, like assessing the list, Revenge and Endless would rise up quite a bit for me. I think honestly, and this is not a slight against the film because I love the film, honestly in that 9 or 10 range would probably be Upgrade, which I really liked a lot, but it would lower a lot for that. Endless and Revenge would rise up pretty high. I feel like Mandy's kind of where it needs to be. I feel like for me in this list, Mandy's kind of where I agree with that. And I kind of agree with, aside from Upgrade, I kind of agree with the upper half of the list. Mm-hmm. One film that did not make the list that I would throw on there is an independent film called Summer of '84 that I highly recommend. It's a Shudder exclusive. Yeah, I would highly recommend it because it's very different. It's completely different than what you would expect it to be, in ways that I find really interesting and compelling. So I would have substituted The Meg. No offense to The Meg. The Meg is fine. The Meg is a perfectly entertaining film. I would have dropped The Meg, and I would have thrown Summer of '84 in there. Endless and Revenge would have risen for me. The rest of the list would pretty much have stayed kind of where it is.
Yeah,
so, except for Upgrade down.
The Meg is, like you just said, fine. And in fact, in some ways, it's fun.
It's very fun. I think, there's a lot of fun.
I think ultimately it's a giant CGI shark, and there's a way that it loses a little bit of its sort of... I did thoroughly enjoy the beach, whatever you want to call it, the beach attack towards the end. That was shot really well, and that was kind of a fun finale.
No, I totally agree.
But cool. So we have officially both seen the top 10 2018 horror movies. I did finish them before you, but we have both seen them.
Okay. How about I just give you a little paper cut and pour lemon juice on it? How about that? You know?
That's like its own horror film right there.
So that was for those of you who didn't catch it. That was a little reference to one of my favorite films from the '80s. That is not a horror film, but is still delightful. That's The Princess Bride that I'm referencing right there. Why don't you give me a little paper cut and pour lemon juice in it? Humpadink, humpadink, humpadink. Humpadink, humpadink, what you watching? What you reading, humpadink? What you listening to? I'm not a witch, I'm your wife. And after what you just said, I'm not even sure I want to be that anymore. You never had it so good.
Anybody?
The rest of the episode.
Anybody want a peanut?
No more rhymes now, I mean it.
Oh, that's a great movie.
I love that movie. Let's just quote that movie for the rest of... Let's
avoid... I mean, if I'm honest, it feels like you're just trying to delay talking about Cam, but...
It is. I wish there was another segment that we could, kind of intersperse that we, didn't have to talk about Cam next.
The good thing about you saying that is, Reed, there's another segment that we get to talk about.
Happy day.
We are in the middle of TV guideposts for 2019, or at least the top of 2019, talking about Mike Flanagan's The Haunting of Hill House. If you're relatively new to our series or to our podcast, welcome. We are grateful for your presence.
Welcome.
Last year we did an actual podcast episode series called TV Guideposts, where we singled out 2 episodes of 3 different TV series, and discussed them: Black Mirror, Twilight Zone, and The X-Files. We have what we think is cracked a bit of the code on how to cover longer form material. By this year with TV Guidepost, we are discussing each Fear of God episode. We are discussing an episode, in this case, of The Haunting of Hill House. We are jumping into episode 5 today, which is The Bent Neck Lady. So we will do an episode each, Fear of God, of The Haunting of Hill House, culminating in what would be chronologically the 10th episode of Hill House. We will do a full Fear of God episode on. So we have that to look forward to. If you are delaying watching Hill House, delay no longer. It's only going to be harder to catch up the longer you wait. It's a great series. And let's bend our necks towards it, Reed. So this is episode 5, The Bent Neck Lady, features is a Nell centric episode. Yeah, please. What?
I'll make one.
Yeah,
I'll make one comment out the gate. So, this series is impressive as a whole, but there is from this point on, it begins to get harder and harder to find what the most impressive moments of the show are, because I recognize, and it's a conversation for next week, I recognize we're talking about one of the most artfully crafted episodes of television ever in episode 6 of Hill House, but emotionally speaking, connective tissue to the different plot threads that they're already been driving towards and teasing at in the show, this is one of the most powerful episodes of this entire show.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
It is incredible.
You mean 5, Bent Neck Lady.
5,
right,
Bent
right.
Neck Lady. Yeah, because last week I said that Luke's episode was one of the most emotionally resonant episodes of the series, and I meant it. But then it's like I got to Bent Neck Lady, and I was like, I was wrong, man. This is one of the most, like, this is... I mean, it's next level in terms of, like, all of the connective tissue, the fear.
Well,
we'll get into the specifics, but...
I'm hopefully going to drop a bomb on you, though it may not be as big a bomb as I want it to be, because it's possible.
Bomb on me.
Lackey. Because, well, let's just put it this way. The more I ponder Hill House, and I've been listening to the score, which is great, the more I am percolating like a long form essay centering on Nell. I don't know if it'll happen or not, but
okay.
I got really moved by this episode, which then subsequently, as you alluded to, next week's is just kind of compounds the effect. So yeah, we're in a Nell centric episode. We start with Steven in episode 1, then Shirley, then Theo, then Luke last week with the twin thing, and now the Bent Neck Lady. Spoiler alert, the Bent Neck Lady of the title, the Bent Neck Lady, a primary specter, so we think of the series up till now, is in fact some sort of chrono-astral projection of a hung Nell. It is her sort of somehow spiritually projecting herself across time, and there's a whole lot of crazy we can discuss there. So, and let's just unpack some likes, dislikes. I'm glancing. I mean, come on, Reed.
I know exactly where you're going.
Their wedding song is "Heavenly Day" by Patty Griffin. Oh my
Heavenly
God!
I know.
That's such y'all. You're getting like peek behind the curtain here. Reed introduced me to Patty Griffin about, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago. This not quite that long. But somewhere in the last
a while back,
decade and a half,
decent while back,
last dozen years or so. So, you start having Nell and her husband dance to Patty Griffin in their wedding. I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And
it's one of the very few songs,
because
it's scored throughout, but it's one of the very few songs used in the series, and to astounding effect. I mean, it's a powerful song anyway. It's a beautiful and lovely song, but juxtaposed with that opening montage, get out of here. Oh gosh.
No, I don't want to. I want to stay and talk about it.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, there's multiple places. Do you want to fire off one or two? I mean, I don't want to dominate the conversation. So
No.
It's
fine. I mean, one of the things that I love is like the first 2 shots are scare moments, and I'm mentioning them in likes because the first 2 scenes of this film or this episode are remembrances of Bent Neck Lady encounters. Okay, it's things that we have seen.
What's the second one?
So the first one is she's at the foot of the bed.
Yeah.
The second one is where she's hovering over
the
couch thing that Nell's sleeping on. We have seen both of those moments in the show before, in abbreviated moments. In fact, the very first shot of the very first episode is Nell screaming because of that image of the Bent Neck Lady in front of the bed. So they're tagging back in on things. The reason I'm mentioning it in likes, because it is freaky, but the reason I'm mentioning it in likes is because one of the things I think the show does brilliantly, and again, huge kudos to Flanagan, who wrote and directed every episode, he ties these threads together in incredibly impressive ways, because he loops in moments that you would think would just be general setup or general tone setting,
right,
and makes them vitally important. Like those reveals, particularly at the beginning of this episode,
right,
of that Bent Neck Lady appearance, when we find out that Nell is the Bent Neck Lady, and that she's, sort of dropping down, as you alluded to, in these moments of previous existence, I mean, it's gut-wrenching to think about, like, oh my gosh, she was seeing herself in both situations. Young Nell was seeing herself. Bent neck lady version of herself is seeing her younger self. It's traumatic. It's insane and terribly powerful the way he wove those threads through the course of the episode. It was really effective.
I think, and if I dwell too heavily in this space, I may weep. So just, I'll try not to do it. But I think Nell as this centerpiece fulcrum upon which this family bends is just so beautiful and tragic and devastating. She is this incredibly broken. I'll come up from the depths just a little bit to say I think when her husband dies is one of
Arthur's death
is one of not just is it harrowing as a viewer, but that moment may be, for a show riddled with weight and gravity and scares, might be one of the saddest moments in that series.
It really is,
because you've got this person in Nell who, because of the traumas she has endured, is just almost a shell, who finds in Arthur this lab tech who's helping her at the front end of the episode come to grips with some of her sleep episodes that she's having, finds this kindred spirit in the truest sense of the word. And so your kind of heart soars for this person who has found her person, and they have this really lovely sort of wedding experience, or no, that's actually, is it the it's the proposal that Heavenly Day happens in, or is it the wedding? I can't remember.
Well, Heavenly Day is over the whole montage.
Oh, right,
so,
right.
Yeah,
right.
so yeah, I think it begins at the New Year's proposal, where he drops her ring in the bottom of a champagne glass, but then the song carries us through to seeing their wedding day, and it's gorgeous.
Yes. And so culminating in his death. You like.
He doesn't die on their wedding day. Just
no.
But it's like, but it quickly shows us that very early in their marriage, he died.
Well, and because what's so beautiful is he has given her these tools to help her deal with this really terrible sort of sleep paralysis she experiences. Yeah. And so it's just this really, really devastatingly heartbreaking moment, because I remember the first time I saw it and it happened, you're like, oh my, no, I mean, you are so devastated for her. Having found this sort of safety in him that then gets just sort of torn away from her. So that's just awful. I love the scene at the wedding of Stephen and Nell watching Shirley watch Theo. That's a
fantastic
great scene. That's
almost endears me to Shirley a little bit. I know I had mentioned how she's not a very endearing character, but her naivete and her utter shock in that moment of finding out Theo's gay is really endearing to watch, and it's endearing because they're watching it, and you feed off of their reactions to it, which is really great.
I also love, like, on a rewatch like we're doing here, you start to see the seeds that are planted that are not visible the first time through. Yeah. Did you catch? There's a scene where Agent Reyes says to young Nell, she says, I can't remember what she's referring to, but she says, "Where did you find this?" And Nell says, "In the toy room."
Oh, the red room. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
But do you remember Reyes's response?
It's not coming to me at the moment. No.
She says, "Where?"
Oh, okay.
So, like, if you recall, spoiler alert for the end, the red room of the show becomes significant towards the end because of ways it manifests differently to individual characters. And so, the fact that I just love that she's just like, what are you talking about? Like this woman who has occupied this house for years and years and years would naturally know what all the rooms are. And so it's just this really lovely, that's great, sort of foreshadowing of where you go. Oh, this is a random sort of technical note, because the note I have is I love the two lights flashing at the house for Nell to come home. Do you remember this?
Oh my gosh.
When she's sitting outside?
Yes.
So I did a deep dive on some interviews and stuff. That exterior is an actual house in the just back roads of Georgia. Like they just,
Really?
yeah, they did location scouting and just found this random house that's there's like no one lives there. It's not near anything. And, you know, we're able to get the permits and stuff to be able to shoot there. But, but they couldn't use the interior. So they only shot from the exterior. And then when they designed the interiors of Hill House, it was with that architectural styling in mind. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was really cool. What else you got, Reed?
Well, I only really have two more things that I want to mention. Both of them are kind of heartbreaking moments. This is a heartbreaking episode. And I was actively sitting there watching this going, man, I cannot tell if this is scarier or sadder, and I think I'm going to lean in on sadder, honestly, because it is terrifying, but there's so much emotional gravity to this. So the two moments I wanted to mention, it just hurts my heart so much when she attends Stephen's book signing or the book reading and stands up and all that she's saying about, like, you're supposed to be my big brother, you're supposed to be looking out for me, and you won't believe anything that I tell you, and it's just, oh my gosh, it is gut-wrenching. Because you recall back, you know, when Theo is talking to her lover and she's saying, you know, and she's saying of that girl that she rescued, like she just needed somebody to listen and nobody was listening. Yep. And then it's like you see that moment where Nell is pouring her guts out in front of everybody to Stephen and saying, like, you know, you say the meanest, I think she said, you say the meanest things to me when I tell you what's going on. And it's just, oh my gosh, it's gut-wrenching to hear that breakdown. But honestly, and it affected me so much more this time around than it ever did, the reveal behind the wallpaper of Come Home Nell.
Yeah.
Because and if you've watched the episode, you know this. If you haven't watched it, please watch it. But there's a moment where Nell gets in trouble for writing chalk on
Young Nell,
child Nell gets in trouble for having written her name on the wall, but she didn't do it, and consistently protests that she didn't do it. But her mother gets her in trouble for it anyway. But when they peel back a little bit more of the wallpaper, underneath the wallpaper, where she could not possibly have written it, are the words "Come Home" for an entire sentence of "Come Home, Nell." Well, then when she returns as adult Nell and goes into Hill House, then it is revealed that it's actually the specter, I guess, if you will, of her mother who wrote Come Home, Nell. I mean, some manifestation of the house. I'm not ready to say that it was really her mother, but some manifestation of the house as her mother writing Come Home, Nell on the wall. And it's devastating. And you feel it. I felt it the first time through. You feel the weight that you have known since episode 1 that Nell, in air quotes, killed herself.
Right.
So you've known that all along. So you know this is a Nell-centric episode. This is the moment she's back in the house. You know something utterly terrible is about to happen. And even the first time through, it's devastating. But this time around, oh my goodness. Yes. I just almost couldn't contain myself. It was so upsetting.
Well, and
very upsetting.
This would qualify a bit as trivial bits, but again, doing this deep dive, I texted you. So something that kind of recontextualized a little bit of the series for me was, you know, I sort of sideways complained about Theo's jokingly referred to her mutant ability for episode 3, Touch. Well, Flanagan, I am using some of this language as a shorthand, but he did make an allusion to this. So know that this isn't entirely him stating, it's me interpreting, but he sort of makes a reference to Liv, the mom, as basically having what in Stephen King parlance would be the shine. To having the shining. And so, you know, you take this a step further, Hill House, let's appropriate it as the Overlook, is kind of devouring this woman, which is the kind of narrative arc, the narrative spine of the series. Well, yeah, he does help me kind of deal with some of the things that I might in my realistic brain try to distill down by saying, you know, Liv is kind of this prism and passes along some elements of this shine to her kids. Namely, he references Theo having this touch ability, Nell having this time sort of thing, projection thing. He references Shirley having kind of a dreams thing, which I think if, again, rewatching it with that in mind, you'd notice too, episode 1, I don't know if you remember this, Shirley is dreaming about the Red Room. She makes references to the Red Room in her sleep.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that was just really interesting from a pure technical standpoint. But what blew my mind, Reed Lackey? Blew my mind!
Uh-oh.
Blew my mind. Made me be like, oh my gosh, this is like next level. Because one of the reasons I've been reading a lot of the interviews is I'm trying to find this reference and I can't find it. So I don't know if it's meant to be like low key, like you got to suss this out, or if I'm just reading into it, but I don't think I am. Okay. So, man, I hope this blows your mind the way it did mine. So do you have any recollection of the timeline Luke uses for his, getting clean, not being clean? Like how long? He
just says it took me 10 years to get the 90-day chip. Now we know that on the cusp of his 90 days is the night that Nell dies. So you can presume that for the past 10 years he's been struggling to get clean. Never clean for more than 3 months in the past 10 years.
I'm about to blow your mind.
Uh-oh.
So he got his 90-day chip. There is an answer in episode 5 for how Luke is able to get clean.
Really?
Yes. There is a scene. Oh, it's right. Oh my gosh. When Nell is taking Luke, which is also a heartbreaking scene, to rehab, and he gets her to buy him some drugs. And this broken child of Nell, adult child now of Nell, is sitting there alone and isolated and sees the bent neck lady.
Yes.
And
yes.
And it's like she's sitting next to her twin, and they make a big deal out of the twin thing throughout the series, and cannot be, he's not present with her. Mm-hmm. That night he goes into rehab.
Right.
That night Nell does something too.
She flushes her drugs down the toilet. Right?
She does.
Is that what you're referring to? Oh my gosh, so you mean he's able to get clean because she's not on drugs anymore?
Correct.
Oh my gosh,
Think
that's
about
crazy.
it. Think about it. She's been on like antidepressants and what have you for 10 years.
Yes.
Luke has been an addict for 10 years. She recognizes his helplessness that night, goes home, dumps her drugs. For the next 90 days, she is reaching out to Stephen, to anyone who will listen to her, while Luke is in rehab and can't get clean. She's going to her therapist. He is saying, "Are you still on your meds?" She's lying and saying she is. She ends up with this mental illness and trauma that she has been carrying with her. She forgoes her own wellness so that Luke can get clean.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. Oh my god, heartbreaking. Good Lord.
Right.
Oh man. Oh, I love this show. No, I totally see what you're saying. And isn't there a moment in the car where he spots her pill bottle?
Yes.
Don't they have a shot in there? Oh my gosh, that's crazy. That's crazy. Never would have. I don't know that I ever would have connected those dots.
Because it just clicked with me when she dumps the drugs. I'm like, why? I was trying to figure out why that mattered. Like, why does it matter that she's dumping the drugs? Because it's not about her making some resolution for herself. It's her seeing him so low and knowing. And the previous episode is the twin thing. He talks about his neck hurting when Steven tells her, like, they beat this drum so hard.
Oh my gosh.
And it's right there. Like, yeah.
That is nuts. That is really nuts. But I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. She makes a conscious choice to sacrifice her wellness so that her brother can get clean.
Right.
Oh my gosh, that is crazy.
Well, I just love
and then never gets to see him again.
Right. And I just love that it's like right there. You know, the fact that in 10 years, you know, it's built into the script. You know, 10 years he couldn't get clean. Now he's clean 90 days for the first time in 10 years. Like, those are significant numbers.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and it's
it's nuts.
Right.
Oh my gosh. No, that is pretty crazy. That's very, very impressive.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, it really is. It really is.
So, that's I guess the only scare I wrote down, man, is the opening scene. And in fact, what I wrote down, Reed, this is an ongoing theme in 2019, is that first scene is an open invitation to Poop Club.
It's true. Oh, it's so
neck
true.
lady is at the foot of the bed. Oh my gosh.
Yes, that is nerve-wracking and terrifying. Well, and just the insane sense of dread that comes in the final scene where she's, she's saying, she's been, golly, this episode just rips your heart out. She gets back to Hill House and then sees all the younger versions of her siblings and everything, but then her mom says, "You're expected," and she comes down to see all of them ready for her wedding day.
Right.
Luke,
Right.
who missed her
Right.
wedding day, is there, and then she steps over, and her husband, who's been deceased for however many years, is now like there and present, and it's just, oh my gosh. And then all culminating to the house essentially tricking her into hanging herself, and it is, oh my gosh, it's devastating. That's the thing, is like, it's scary. That whole thing is dreadful and scary, but I think it is more emotionally wrenching than it is, frightening or anything. But a powerful episode. Arguably, I don't know, maybe I'll feel differently once we get later in the show, but arguably the crowning achievement of the show. It's a phenomenal episode. We could devote the whole rest of the time to it if we want to.
It is probably nice try. I would say it's probably the pound for pound the strongest character-centric episode.
I agree with that. Yeah, definitely.
I love the Luke episode, but in terms of just rich character work, it might be the finest one.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think it definitely is.
Well, Reed, we can avoid the camera no longer. So
the camera is on us.
It is. So, is it ever? So we are going to pivot out of Hill House. We fortunately have the fortitude to be able to do that. Pour a cold one out for Nell and Liv Crane. And we are going to jump into Read Netflix and Chills. So it's been a good series up till now. We have not. We didn't realize how much we were tempting fate. There is some version of this at the top of this episode. They make this comment in therapy sometimes. You don't know what you don't know. And goodness gracious, we did not know. So Cam, this film, directed by Daniel Goldhaber, and written by Issa Mazzei. I don't know if I'm saying that right or not, but starring Madeline Brewer. So this film made a lot of lists in terms of 2018 horror. And I am personally the type of person who, if I've said this many times on the show before, if I know I'm going to see something or have an idea I won't really read much. I won't watch trailers.
Right. Right.
You and I sort of, in this particular instance, kind of more or less did the same thing. It was like, hey, Cam has made some lists. It's on Netflix. It's distributed by Netflix. Let's add it to Netflix and Chills. And we're like, okay, let's do it.
Yep.
Kind of like the 2018 Top 10 Horror. I did watch this first and
yes.
texted
yes,
you
did.
And I was like, oh boy. So just a heads up, everybody, so it doesn't go without saying, Reed and I are very sensitive to the material we encourage you or that we engage on the show sometimes. This is a very heavy film. I'm hesitant to say it's got graphic sexuality to it, and it is, reveals a part of the world that you may not know exists. I didn't really know exist. And so just know, if you watch this film, do so eyes wide open. Do not have your Bird Box blindfold on. It is very heavy.
Yeah.
There's a world where it would have made a hell of a lot more sense for us to have, I thought this after Vertigo last year. I definitely think it with this one. Time did not quite permit. We should have had, a woman or two's voice engaging this conversation.
I agree.
We are highly cognizant of the fact that we are just two dudes wading into some very deep waters that we may not quite be ready for, but we are going to take the material on its own terms and kind of deal with it in that regard, no less than we would any other piece of material. Does that seem like a fair sort of prelude there, Reed?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And in case, I feel like Nathan summed it up pretty well, but in case there's any ambiguity here, the issue at play is not so much that the film itself is sexually graphic or sexually explicit, although at times it is. This is a case where really the subject, not necessarily what is shown, although some things that are shown would be this, but it is the subject at large that warrants the disclaimer, because it is, even in the areas of its restraint, it is still this was kind of speaking to my experience. There were still moments where the film itself did not quite get very overtly graphic, but I was still terribly uncomfortable with what I was watching. Just it's a sort of a disturbing and an upsetting plot, which we can briefly describe. But we gave an issue we issued a warning or a disclaimer at the top of the episode. We'll say so now. We're going to have the conversation that we tend to have on the show, but we feel, like Nathan said, it's important to acknowledge that we are two guys, and we're about to wade into the waters of some subject matter that can possibly be a little sensitive, and particularly if you are sensitive to conversations about the subject of sexuality and specifically pornography, then I would exercise some caution. I'm not saying don't listen, because obviously our conversation will be tamer than the film was, but exercise some caution, as we will, I'm sure.
Well, and to that point, usually we inadvertently typically neglect to do this until kind of midway through the film's conversation. But the movie is called Cam. It is written by, and it actually, I think the director had a co-write credit too, but story by and primarily written by, again, her name, I'm going to make a presumption here.
It's a Mazzei, I believe.
Okay, cool. I will
Mazzei.
let you say it that way. Who herself was a cam girl. So in the world of internet life, there's a phenomena of the cam girl, and I'm sure there's probably cam guys too. It's kind of sexual performance art. So she's performing for viewership and for income. And so the woman, as Reed just pronounced her name, wrote this story. She does come from that world and kind of wanted to write about her experience. And it's interesting. I did do some reading on it. Initially, the idea was kind of a documentary style type thing, but then they found their way into kind of, this sort of horror angle, which succeeded.
Yeah.
So yeah, just know it's kind of, well, the plot, yes. So it's about, this character Alice, whose kind of, online persona is Lola. And this event happens about the midpoint of the movie, where this digital doppelganger that is the same actress is performing her kind of routines and for her audience. And so it's this really creepy. So take the sort of discomfort that Reed has alluded to already of just the general nature of the film, and then add to it this hyper creep factor of this character being unnerved and creeped out and discomfited by what is literally her performing for her audience. She gets locked out of her account, and it's kind of the bedlam that ensues from there. And it is, even ignore the sort of sensitive nature of the material. It is definitely qualifies as a thriller and, a kind of horror film.
Oh,
it
absolutely.
Definitely has the earmarks of that world.
Yeah.
Were there any, I think you have done this since we initially talked about it months and months ago. Did you end up watching Handmaid's Tale?
Oh, yeah. I'm caught up with Handmaid's Tale. My wife and I both watched the first 2 seasons.
Well, I did not. It's funny watching Cam. I was like, man, I recognize her, but it just wasn't clicking with me. And yeah, she's I presume still. I stopped after the second or third episode of season 2 of Handmaid, but this actress Madeline Brewer is a featured player on Handmaid's Tale, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah, in Handmaid's Tale, she has one of the more sort of overtly outrageous plot lines. Well, her character is prone to fits and makes a lot of trouble for herself because of that. Yeah, so I have a couple more little trivial bits. Of this. The film opens with the credit, and it's kind of a big, sort of giving the finger to the director ownership of a film world and perception. The film opens with the credit, a film by Issa Mazzei and Daniel Goldhaber. I don't know if I'm saying either of those names correctly, but Daniel Goldhaber was the only director. Issa Mazzei was the only writer, but they credited the film to both of them as
Gotcha.
This sort of collaborative process. It's a Mazzei does. Do you remember the scene where she's talking on the phone to the tech support and the tech support's not being helpful? The checkout girl who kind of gives her side eye, that's the writer.
Uh-huh.
That's the writer.
Oh, okay.
That's a cameo by the writer. Something that I found, it just is what it is. But the way that they met is actually because when It's a Mazzei was in the cam girl world, the director of this film had directed some of her product, as it were.
Oh, wow.
And so that's how they knew each other, and that's how they knew this would be an effective collaboration. You know, he really would not have much difficulty getting on board with what she wanted to do and what she wanted to say with this material. And I don't know, this is quasi-confessional on my part. I did grow up in a very sort of sheltered and naive bubble in my little existence. Grew up in a Southern pastor's home. My father was an evangelist, and then he became a pastor, and my mother worked for the denomination. So a lot of our sort of cultural circle was very saturated with just religious people and fellow churchgoers, and just that was sort of the world and the climate. And I grew up terribly naive, a lot of which I've still carried with me into adulthood. But even in just sort of brushing up against the subject of, oh yeah, like you described earlier, Cam has made it to a lot of lists, top horror, and it's getting a lot of praise. We should cover it, and knew nothing about it. I had no idea what a cam girl was, and so when the opening scene of this movie happens, I don't know whether to classify this as like a dislike, a scare. But when the opening scene is, because the film opens with one of Nathan already described sort of what Cam Girl does, but it opens with one of the main character's sort of performance pieces. But it takes a kind of a dark turn because in this little world, anonymous internet browsers sort of pay money, but it's like that Bitcoin thing, or it's like a cryptocurrency or technocurrency. I can't remember what they call it. I think they call it cryptocurrency, but it's something where they can drop, a bit of these tokens in to prompt the performer to do certain things. And it, again, these things are specifically kind of a sexual nature. Well, then somebody drops into the room and starts compelling her to do violence to herself. And that starts to escalate. It's a really upsetting scene. Like the whole thing. The whole thing is very upsetting because then, and this is the opening scene of the movie. Like they're just kicking the door down. This is what we're dealing with. Here it is. And so somebody begins to prompt her to do violence to herself, which then he starts dropping a lot of money. It gets wild reactions from the other anonymous visitors in the chat room, and in that arena, then she appears for a good 15 to 20 seconds to have committed suicide on screen, on camera. And you discover, again, after about half a minute, which is it's long enough that you're like,
it is.
What just happened? What am I in store for? And you discover that it was a ruse.
I'm sitting there thinking, well, here's another fine mess Reed's gotten me into.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh. Ollie. But you discover after, again, about a half a minute that it was a ruse, that it was a performance piece that she was doing to elicit those kinds of reactions. And that the person who was prompting her to do it had previously, he'd been planted presumably by her, or they had come up with it together to do that sort of thing. But I think the thing that, and this would be in sort of the dislikes. I don't want to be intentionally heavy. I do want to be intentionally sensitive, but this is a subject matter which, because of my upbringing, because of, and we don't need to get into the, broadcast therapy for Reed or the psychology of all these different things, but it evokes certain, I'm going to use the word
shame triggers.
Not shame, not shame or guilt.
Sure.
I'm cautious of the word repulsion. But that's the closest approximate word that I can give.
Sure.
It is this reversal, whereas where some people might be enticed, attracted, and drawn into this kind of thing as a sort of a secret, as you said, sort of maybe shameful, but a hidden, forbidden thing that we're drawn into. My reaction is almost, again, it's my psychology. I'm not attaching any sort of moral weight to it. It's my psychology based on my upbringing and everything like that. My reaction to that kind of subject matter is overt repulsion, where I draw back, I retreat, I'm like, hide my eyes, don't really. It was very difficult for me to sit through this movie, not because what is presented is necessarily overtly graphic. Again, I want to be very clear. It's the subject it's dealing with, and what it puts its characters through that my individual psychology was struggled with quite a bit. And so that, that's my experience.
I want to let you off the hook a little bit. I mean, just like I think that you're identifying, and there's a way this could immediately explode out into just a really big meta conversation about religious culture and upbringing. And I do think there's a world in which, for people like you and I, which is to say late 30-something men who grew up at least striving for some form of integrity, you were much more inculcated in a religious bubble than I was per se. But even still, I mean, I kind of operated on the orbit of a similar type bubble for many of my years, just not in my most formative years like you did. But, there's just a world where, like, you're indoctrinated in those spheres to have extreme levels of shame and I know you dispense with that word. I'm just saying for
sure
trying to assess the experience in general. Shame attached to sort of sexual content and that sort of thing. And I do think there's a way. It's so funny. People listen to this are probably like, "Holy cow!" Read Nathan stepped on a landmine. And in many ways, that's true. It's
almost exactly what happened.
But I just think it's fascinating to assess it on that level. It's like, because what I don't want is, to be judgmental of this character's journey, to be judgmental of these creators' kind of journey. And this is where it gets into just kind of an interesting sort of sociological conversation about agency and consent and participation and all this sort of stuff. And I don't know, there's a very interesting conversation to be had here. I think I'm speaking for me, but I think partly for you too. Our sensitivity is just, there's a way to, hetero evangelically bred dudes, could really get themselves in trouble if we're not careful with how we kind of discuss this. And so there's just a lot of sensitivity around that.
And I want to be very clear about one thing. Like, you and I had sort of briefly touched on this off pod. It lands differently if you're looking at different psychological spectrums, but obviously we deal in the horror genre, which is exhibitive of a tremendous amount of violence. And I can understand how somebody would be like, wow, well, you guys have no problem with, like, the violence or, that kind of stuff. So, why the strong aversion to this kind of thing? And I can speak to a few specifics from the film about what, created those reactions in me. But I think it is very different because you and I are also, even in the violence spectrum, and I think even on this show, we've been sensitive to violence as ultra nihilistic. Like, we haven't really covered anything that would be categorized in, like, the subgenre of, like, torture porn. Not to say that we never would, but something that is of a more exhibitive nature is something that we shy away from as well. Yes, there are violence in the films we cover. Yes, there are occasionally sexual material in the films we cover. But I think you and I both, if something is dealing with exploitation, we would tend to drift away from that just in terms of our proclivities and things like that. Again, I don't want to speak for you, but I think here is a film, a very artfully, lest it go unsaid, a very artfully and well-made, I think really well-made film that is dealing with the subject of exhibition in its premise. It's dealing
Right,
with
right.
in the basest form of what this film is dealing with. It's dealing with exhibition. So naturally, I, being framed the way I am, yes, a man, yes, with a Christian upbringing, but when I already have a sort of an aversion to things of an exhibition nature, naturally I'm going to have some distance from this film, or naturally I'm going to have some strong reactions to it. So anyway, I felt the need to sort of put that out there.
Yeah, well, and to get us back towards the shallows, at least for a few minutes, so what you're saying is there's not going to be any in a box jokes.
Wow, not this episode. Not this episode, Mr. Rouse. Oh my gosh.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just trying to get us back into some surface stuff. So
Sure,
before we
sure.
wade back into the waters.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of my first notes. So there's a point where Alice. So one thing that I found just interesting about the movie is like she has a brother. You know, the lead character has a brother, and the brother at least seems to, until it spirals out of control a bit, kind of knows about what she does, or at least some version of what she does.
Yeah.
And kind of, I don't know, there's a little bit of banter there. Well, so her mother is a hairstylist.
Yes.
So Alice is getting her hair done, or she's at the salon or whatever, and she's shopping on her phone.
Oh my gosh.
And she's like buying this $5,000 couch. And what I wrote down is, man, I'm in the wrong business.
Oh,
Well, what's
no.
what's hilarious, Reed, is it says 10 minutes later, never mind, this is too much work.
Oh my gosh.
Just watching her, make her money.
Yeah, it's true.
You know what? I don't have much in the likes, dislikes. I've got a ton in the scares.
I've got a couple in likes, dislikes.
Yeah.
So I've already kind of addressed. I had written down to mention, why the subject of the film is kind of uncomfortable for me. But but less to go and said, like, the performances are stellar. Like Madeline, what is the last name? Brewer. Yeah, Madeline Brewer, like, delivers a fully committed, very effective performance. And I really feel like not only from her, but from also the supporting players, everybody is very committed and very believable to what they're doing. So the performances are really outstanding. I obviously found it upsetting, but it was one of the few times in the film where I specifically very much empathized with her and what she was feeling when the brother's friend just announces to the room what she does. Just some context for the moment is that there's her brother, who kind of has some awareness of what she does, somehow his friend finds out, and like they're all together for a birthday party. And this friend just announces it to a crowded house full of people, including her mother, none of whom knew that was what she did and that was how she made her money. She had been telling people that she was kind of doing a freelance internet thing, which was...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's
you're fine.
It's important to note there, plot-wise, and this is actually interesting from the writer's this is a true inspiration for the story. So the cam girl sort of website she works for, or is her agent, basically.
The platform in which she operates.
Yeah.
Yes.
The social platform there, is an isolated system. It's an isolated platform. Well, what happens, and this is what happened to the writer in real life, is one of her videos kind of escapes. It's kind of like, hey, I've got all my privacy settings are of the highest ranking on my Facebook or on my Instagram or whatever, and somehow one of your, kind of posts gets out into the world and you didn't mean it to. Well, this is what happens to her. And so that's what the young men stumble upon. They don't stumble on her normal, because that's where she has control. Gotcha. And that's where this whole notion of consent and digital consent, all this sort of stuff is interesting. But so to parlay back into what you're saying is that's what those young men discover is her videos have gotten farmed out to the internet at large, and they find it.
Yeah, that's an important addition. The other thing that I have in my likes dislikes category is, and this again, this is something that I just find utterly kind of, it's just we're just messed up as human beings. We're just messed up as people. When she tries, because as part of the plot, Nathan alluded to it earlier, as part of the plot, somebody begins to basically adopt her face. and begins to post videos to her account while she's not posting. And so it's this whole doppelganger phenomenon. And she doesn't know, is this a real person? Is this some sort of computer hack? I don't know what it is. Well, when she finally calls the police in and proves to them definitively, hey, this is live right now, and I'm right here, so clearly somebody has stolen my identity. But the police officers, both male, are so painfully dismissive of her plight. One of them, I think, says, to stay off the internet. And another one pays her, I'm not even going to repeat it here, pays her just the most absurd and offensive version of a quote-unquote compliment. It's really pretty upsetting. It's upsetting to her. It's upsetting to us as the viewer that that an authentic appeal to the authorities who are supposed to regulate this kind of behavior is met with such dismissive and disparaging reactions. It's a really upsetting moment. Again, the film is terribly effective. Like, I'm going to be a bit hard on the film in terms of subject matter, but the film is very well made, and its moments are very effectively rendered. Any of the sort of critique I would have of the film is definitely not of the craft involved in what was executed. I want that to be very clear.
Well, and fascinatingly, I think the film works as this kind of broken mirror idea. Like, you can, I'm not saying you read, but a viewer, especially a viewer from a more religious background like say us, will have the tendency to judge her. Well,
yeah.
I think if you take this is me thinking out loud, but if you sort of remove the moralistic note to what she's doing, in other words, she is, as an adult with agency, consenting to her own performance under a controlled environment, and insofar as she understands it. So that pure kind of activity is not moralistic in and of itself, right?
I understand what you're saying.
From a purely industrious kind of mindset. So that, just that activity, that action, that choice is not moral or immoral. Now, someone might say, well, you're using your body as an income producing sort of thing, and attach moralistic overtones of that, which, that's a whole other conversation. But what becomes fascinating is then when the cops show up, the serve and protect idea, and as you identify, one dismisses her, and in fact his line is, if you don't want to see stuff like this, and what he's referring to is identity theft, effectively, of the most heinous version. He says, if you don't want to see stuff like this, stay off the internet. The other one, I think effectively she tells him what she does, and doesn't he basically solicit her almost, like, well, tell me about it, or like what?
He says, what's the craziest thing, or what's the weirdest thing you've ever been asked to do?
It's very uncomfortable. And so,
which is something, by the way, that's a question the writer of the film receives. She said, I don't know if this was in an interview or in some sort of unpacking of the film, but she said that's the question she most often gets. What's the weirdest thing you've ever been asked to do? Yeah, this was the writer of the film. Yeah.
Well, and I guess all I'm trying to say is that scene becomes this really fractured mirror as we look in it, of like, you can judge her if you want, but at the end of the day, at least in that moment, have some compassion on this character whose life is being torn apart. And now this authority figure is like lording his authority over her in the moment.
Right.
And or utterly disregarding her sort of, need for protection. And it's really disheartening and distressing. And to the extent we're able, I do want to just kind of, we've laid a lot of groundwork in terms of the sort of moralistic or not sort of overtones here. In terms of just approaching the film on its own, like, it's a harrowing film, almost literally beginning to end. Reed already alluded to, and so I'm effectively in scares now, but this opening sequence, and again, I think I may have subconsciously known I was watching it ahead of you. I had a little bit of extra time, and so I was like, I'm going to get this out of the way. And this opening 3 minutes where she's doing this performance thing, and even, the performance thing starts, you're like, okay, this is what the cam part means. And then she has what you come to learn is a faux suicide, but you don't know it in the moment. And in my head, I was like, holy shit, what on earth are we? Oh my goodness. Like this.
Yes.
It goes up to 11 real quick. So
kind of starts at 9 and then just continues to absolutely.
Well, what you come to learn through the course of the film is, as Reed mentioned earlier, one of the person baiting in the chat room, the suicide, performance is someone she's planted there. It's someone that you learn she's got a couple of kind of paramours or, digital paramours that, kind of dote on her. But again, in this sort of way that is, she's comfortable with kind of thing. It's not initially, inherently, troubling or whatever, distressing to her. But where the movie starts to take the real horror turn is some of these suitors start showing up in her real life. And that is creepy.
Her dinner date with Barnaby.
Barney.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
That is awful. So
it's terrible.
But even before that is Tinker is his online name at the salon. The guy she gets to set up the suicide thing shows up in her real life. She gets very unnerved by it. She accosts him in a public place because he's shown up there, and he says, "You told me you love me," and it's just, oh my gosh,
it's awful.
There are so many levels, and from that standpoint, it is a very fascinating film. I do think just the boys discovering her online at the party is really terrible and scary. Like all of this stuff is in my scares. Reed just mentioned Barney at the restaurant. So this is someone she starts, once this doppelganger aspect of the film kicks in, she starts trying to sleuth her way into figuring out what's going on. Well, she sets up this real life date with one of these suitors, this person who's going to buy her things and take her to dinners and all this sort of stuff. But it's this older, gross dude. And while she's on the date with him, she excuses herself to the restroom. He somehow realizes that there's a show going.
Yeah, well, I don't know why he's got it activated on his phone or whatever, but he sees it on his phone that her profile is live
active
and online. And so he's like, how can that be when you're on a date with me? And that's, and his reaction to it is,
it turns ugly quickly.
Terribly frightening. Yes, it does. Yeah, it really does.
I guess just one or two more scares here, then we can dive into the themes, for me at least, in terms of scares. But yeah, I think that one of the truly separate from all the sort of discomfort of just the sexuality aspect, one of the true scary movie scenes in this film is when she is watching the doppelganger video taking place in her apartment bedroom. No, she's in her apartment bedroom while it's live from her performance room. And the doppelganger in the performance room starts trekking through her apartment to her. Oh my gosh, it's creepy.
Yeah. Oh, it's terribly unnerving. And she starts having this real visceral reaction where she's like, "Get out of my room, get out of my house," and oh man, it's very upsetting. Go
ahead, please.
I was just gonna say the only other sort of scare that I had on my list was just the individual suicide scenes are, again, both of them turn out to be
I don't remember
fabrications.
The second one. What was
the second one is the doppelganger version of her shoots herself.
Oh,
yeah. And so both of those scenes are they're actually both revealed in the moment to be fabrications.
Right.
Yeah, but it's still it's terribly upsetting because the camera does not flinch away.
I think the last kind of major scare, it's a quote. So late in the film, Tinker, this guy, this nebbish, gross, sweaty dude, who has confronted her in the real world, she goes and seeks him out because for some reason I can't recall, she intuits that he might have some ideas as to what's going on with her sort of doppelganger thing. Well, she confronts him. He seems very cognizant of the phenomena she's describing. And his line, Reed, his line is, "I've watched enough to know when a girl's going to be copied."
Oh,
I thought,
goodness.
In fact, what I wrote is, this is intense and heavy and awful right after it.
Yes, indeed.
I mean, just the implications of that are just so awful and heartbreaking and staggering.
Yeah, it's true.
So there's a lot of places we can go thematically with this.
Sure.
And so that I know, do you have any real kind of, I want this to be the last kind of theme or profound sort of things you want to sort of throw into the mix?
Well, I had two possible things to. I wrote down basically two subjects to possibly explore with this. Neither one of them are things that I necessarily feel, okay, the conversation can't end until I've said this.
Right.
But it's possible that both of them may come up in this thematic conversation because they're kind of related to each other.
Well, let me throw a surface one at us that may get us into some deeper waters. I mean, there's a whole host of things we could talk about in terms of the sex and violence and consent kind of, commoditization of bodies and female bodies and that sort of thing. And I think we might get there. But on a very surface level, goodness gracious, this movie was such a profound illustration of what Sherry Turkle, whom I referenced multiple times over the years of the show, who does a lot of study and research on human interaction with technology, what she refers to as the digital double. And in fact, I went back and looked through some of my notes I'd taken in one of her books, Reclaiming Conversation, and she talks about our engagement with social media. And you could argue more or less the internet at large, but as most, let's say, of a normal American's internet time these days, probably 80+% of it is on social media.
Right.
Of the way the internet scrapes your data as you use it. Such that things like, and we all know these stories by now, but reflecting back to you ads for a thing you searched for 5 minutes ago.
Right.
I just read the other day about a patent that Google Assistant, or that Google is trying to push through for Google Assistant, where your smart home device, your smart home elements can measure the tones of voice associated with you. Things like when you're brushing your teeth, things like how your tone of voice is in arguments and things like that. Thus using this sort of data to spit back. The internet is going to eat us, and it's going to happen sooner than we like. Little notes like, I was listening to a conversation the other day about big tech. It was a Chris Hayes episode. I reference him a lot. This journalist who made active efforts to 1 week not use anything Amazon associated, the next week not use anything Facebook associated. So did this for several weeks with different big tech companies. And I don't know if you know this, Reed. Amazon, like the Amazon store, is basically just the surface of the water in terms of what Amazon does in the world. Major government contracts, houses a third of the world's internet data.
My goodness.
In terms of servers. She was saying that in order to completely cut herself off from Amazon, handicapped her pretty much completely from much to any sort of functional internet usage. Interestingly, Apple is, and she made a point. She was like, the reason Apple products tend to be so expensive is because part of what you're paying for is the fact that Apple is a hardware company and they position themselves that way. They don't go after your data. Like, they are very big on individuals' privacy. Google, Facebook, Amazon are not whatsoever. That's why these things are quote unquote free. Well, so Sherry Turkle, tying this towards the movie, talks about this digital double, in a world where you're using Facebook and all of its itinerant sort of attached technologies, in a world where you're using all that Amazon has to power the internet with, in a world where you're using Google. She tries to shut off Google and realizes how much she uses her maps. And even things like Ubers and Lyfts, which she now can't utilize because they are reliant on Google Maps. But all of these things that are pulling bits of your data and your online life and creating this digital double reflection of you.
Right.
So
right.
You can see where this is going. Like, this movie creates the horror movie version of that. And you made an allusion to this earlier, and I don't know if you were saying this. For me personally, I do not think whatsoever the movie is positioning this other Lola as a real human out in the world.
Oh, no, I definitely think
okay,
it's an
okay.
algorithm.
Yeah,
and in fact, I read that there is a deleted scene which definitively proves it is an algorithm that is created and generated by reviewing, cataloging, and replicating Alice's cam name is Lola, by sort of cataloging her material and creating a digital version of her. There was a scene that definitively proved it was an algorithm that supposedly got excised from the film.
That's interesting, because I don't know if I would have liked it more with it in or with it out. I mean, because part of me wishes for a little less ambiguity, but part of me likes that too. Because the movie as it is does not definitively state. It highly suggests.
Particularly in that nose-breaking scene.
Yeah. But I guess this is just a long-winded way of getting to this notion of what we see in Alice's experience we view as horrific and part of a horror movie, and yet it is not currently our physical sexual bodies, but in many ways this is happening. Like
the
algorithmic nature, the fact that your Facebook account is free and yet it's one of the largest companies on the planet means they're getting something. And what they're getting is your information, and this movie just turns that into the most intimately invasive version, which is your sexual self replicated without your permission or consent, used for the titillation of gross tinkers out in the world. I mean, even then, Reed, like, and feel free to jump in whenever you want, but this one just came to me today of like this cracked mirror idea of this movie. Like, when the indictment, the tacit chastisement the movie is making, it doesn't drive this home. But when Tinker, there's a scene, the scene I referenced earlier where Alice shows up to this hotel room. Well, she finds later, this is crude, but it's what's happening, Tinker masturbating to this digital double of hers. And I just thought, oh my God, this is the world we are steering into, which is, take it from a gender perspective in that scenario if you want, men, this is no longer even a human on offer here. You know what I mean? This disembodied, purely for someone else's pleasure and consumption. There's a lot to be mined here. I'm just kind of talking. What do you think?
Yeah, well, so this was one of my little points. The scene, it stood out to me thematically. Probably the scene that stood out to me the most is after the dreadful reveal at the birthday party of what she does for a living. Then there's a scene a bit later where her mother, adverse of the police officers, authentically compliments her and says, you're good at what you do.
Right.
And then this was what was so fascinating. Her predicament in the film is that somebody has copied her existence. And so it is not actually her. It is a double. It is a doppelganger. But as she is trying to communicate to her mother, that's not me. That's not me doing these things. Her mother translates it as if she is saying something on a psychological level, as if she's saying that's not who I really am, or that's not, the substance of me.
Right.
Because her mother is in like, well, no, I'm in the know. I forget exactly what phrases she uses, but her mother is like, I'm a modern woman. I have modern sensibilities. I understand this, this dynamic and everything. And Alice is really struggling to get through to her mother this simple fact of, no, my identity has been stolen. I have been copied. This is not me. But I just found it so fascinating. You're talking about these dissociative sort of identity factors, these this digital double, as it were. And it did make me think a tremendous amount about how much, and this is one of the themes that I would specify in this arena or any other, of how much power we give to our fantasy world, to our fantasy imaginings, and the power and the control that we allow them to influence our choices, influence our behaviors, and so this specific industry, again, you spoke about it, I think deftly so, sort of removing the moralistic nature of it and viewing it just as an industry. I'm going to risk ascribing a bit of a moral statement or sentiment to this, but this industry, as basically all industries would say that they do, sort of capitalizes on a need of its consumers. And then it perpetuates that, a service, I guess you could say, and it perpetuates that to its consumers. The difference with this is that by its own nature, by the nature of this service, it is addictive. It is something that people return to frequently. There is a documentary that I saw recently, and I highly recommend this documentary. I was surprised. I was very moved by it. I was surprised to find online that there are some differing opinions about its content, but I found it very moving. It's a film called The Mask You Live In. Have you heard of this film?
No.
Okay. So The Mask You Live In is a documentary about the ways in which society shapes, influences, and in many ways controls the masculine definition, like the definition of what it means to be a man. And it's a fascinating documentary because it's actually directed by a woman, but she speaks to a number.
What is it called? The Mask You Wear? What'd you call it?
The Mask You Live In is the name of it. And it's a 90-minute documentary, but in it she explores certain patterns of behavior, and boys are basically taught from certain key things from very young ages. They're taught these things, and then they develop into men who exhibit certain consequential behaviors because of the things that they're taught. One of the things she highlights, and it's not a narrated by a woman. There's a number of different voices, male and female, of different psychologists and different walks of life that sort of deal with this subject. But one of the things they land on is they say boys are taught from an early age emotional suppression. Boys don't cry. Be a man, man up. Aggression, that the way you solve problems is by being the toughest guy on the playground. Force, yes. And then another one is sexual conquest, and making aspersions on your value as a human being based on how much women desire you and how many of them you can, conquest language, how many of them you can sort of win. Right. And the documentary is fascinating because it does not absolve predatory behavior, but it very much says in several times over, but there are factors feeding into this that make it far more complicated than just telling somebody to cut it out. There are factors from the youngest of ages, both generational and cultural, that make men feel like they have to be a certain way. And one of the reasons why a film like this is complicated for me to talk about as a man is because I could not possibly have an understanding of what it is like to be a woman who wants to have, as you described earlier, agency and a sense of not only value, but a sense of talent, if you want to call it that, something that she can succeed at. Right. And it's tough because on one level, I feel like the world that this film depicts is very entrapping. Like there's that one scene where she's in a private chat with Barney, and then somebody comes in, somebody opens a door in Barney's room, and he's having a private chat with her, and then somebody opens a door in her room, and he just quickly closes the laptop down. Right. And then there's also just the very fact that they are the concept and premise of the film is that she will do what they pay for. that's what her performance basically is. She does some things kind of on her own, but she will do what they pay for. And it struck me as, and just put this very, very heavy weight in my gut about these things that basically imprison us into making us feel like we have, and we've talked about this on the show before in different contexts, where it traps you into believing you have agency, believing you have control, when I would really wonder if you really do. Like one of the things that has always frustrated me, has always left question marks in my mind in light of what I consider to be very important social movements like #MeToo and certain other things like that, is this industry, the industry of exhibition of women's bodies, specifically for male satisfaction, if you will, or female satisfaction, because the visitors are anonymous. Well, okay, so I'm rambling a bit. There's something that I'm avoiding saying that I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off and go ahead and say. I know we're kind of trying to be sensitive to not make overtly moral, have an overtly moral conversation about the subject matter here, but sort of the more I try to do that, I suddenly feel like I'm no longer having an honest conversation about it. The fact is that I do not understand what it means to be a woman and need agency and need autonomy, and so with the sincere disclaimer that I do not understand what that is like, and therefore would be remiss to presume that I can speak objectively about it. I have some severe moral reservations about this industry and the way that the industry feeds on male desires and the way it exploits bodies, both male and female. I have some severe reservations, and I would even go so far as to say, like, I really would indict that industry for fostering and cultivating a lot of the sort of deviance in sexual behavior that we see in a lot of people in this day and age. And I know that some people, I've heard it expressed, some people are like, well, it's consenting adults, and there's this whole subset of thoughts about, desires and the agency to enact those desires. But I think ultimately, you talk about this digital double, talk about this other self. I feel like this is, and this is what we've expressed before on the show, I feel like it is an offer of freedom that is merely the back door to a trap in which it imprisons you in a different version of addiction. And I know that's a real heavy just like statement to say on this, but I had to just put that kind of bluntly out there because I was beginning to feel like I wasn't being honest about what I was saying.
Well, and we do explore, we don't explain. There's a whole lot of threads. This could be a 3-hour conversation with all of the layers inherent here. I do want to make a distinction, though, that I do think is inherent to what I think you're after. This is me just sort of hypothesizing here,
yeah.
but I think there's a difference, and I imagine a person like Alice would make this distinction as well, like that I think there's a difference between exhibitionism and exploitation. Now, is there a very thin line between those at times? I would imagine yes. But because you're not incorrect. We are a craven people with base, disgusting, I don't mean that in a like sophomoric way. We are horrific to each other and to each other's bodies.
Right.
Kind of just as a species. I am cognizant of, I don't know how much you've seen these headlines lately, but I don't even want to say the people's names, but there's a major NFL person who's being linked right now to a team owner who's being linked right now to these massage parlors that effectively was indentured servitude for like hundreds of women.
Yeah.
So you've got that going on in the news. You've got this Florida politician person, actually don't know his role because I didn't study it enough because it repulses me so, who has been credibly, accused of sex with underage girls. Like it's horrific and horrendous and atrocious and abominable to the core. And now, does exhibitionism to a mass broadcast is the logical endpoint a form of exploitation? There's maybe a large degree to which that answer is yes.
Yeah.
But I do think, and maybe I'm splitting hairs, and I'm not necessarily trying to defend one position or the other. I just think, I do want to be sensitive to, because I've thought about this, but like some of the podcasts I listen to talk about the TV show The Deuce. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I think it's a David Simon show. It's an HBO series. Maggie Gyllenhaal's on it, but it's about the porn industry in New York in the 70s. And apparently it's like, just being heralded as a really great piece of feminist work. And I'm not even being, my tone sounds dismissive. I don't mean to. There are ways in which I don't personally understand how do I say this? There are ways I'm not smart enough to engage that conversation. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Right. And so all I'm trying to say is I think to the cognizant, and many religious folk would roll their eyes at some of this language I'm using, to the cognizant entrepreneurial sex worker, they would make a distinct difference between exhibitionism and exploitation. Would I side with that? I don't know. I just think I don't disagree with you, my friend, who would say there's a parasitic, gross web that cultivates and props up an industry where maybe someone thinks they have agency and don't. I don't know. These are things that sometimes feel just above my pay grade.
Well, and I'm right there with you. But to get to specifically respond to the film, and I know I already talked a long time, but to specifically reference the film, she's telling her mother, "That's not me. That's not me." And to the degree in which I'm fascinated on a different subject, to the degree in which people identify themselves as what they do. So people would say, "I am a writer. I am an actor. I am an engineer. I am, a construction worker. I am whatever field or creative industry or industry in general that you are in." The ways in which we associate ourselves as what we do, and we make that statement, "I am this thing." What's fascinating to me is there are people, very few people, I think, who would say that what they do is the summation of who they are. I find that to be, we're talking about digital doubles in the context of what the premise of Cam is. But I think there are people who would wholeheartedly attest, no, I am not summed up entirely by just what I work at or what I do. But I feel like with this specific industry, I think you said something to this effect, but the lines of exploitation and exhibition really get blurry very, very fast, because you are something that I had mentioned earlier about the power and influence you are allowing your fantasy world to have in your life and in who you are, to the degree that this so her image in Cam has been stolen, her image and her profile. So I think it can't go unsaid that the way the film ends is that she deletes the account, but she doesn't walk away from the industry.
Sure.
She starts over with a new, fresh, false identity, a false self, as it were. And because as we're sitting here talking, I looked up the definition for exhibition and exploitation. And exhibition basically is just the display of a particular skill, which you could say is what Alice is doing. The definition of exploitation is benefiting from someone unfairly. So you're benefiting from somebody, and so then you get into all these definitions about fairness and choice and everything. And one of the key things for me is the ending of the film. The writer of this film was in this world. The director of this film was in this world. And when they chose to end their film, they chose to end it by her taking back her agency with a new false identity rather than abandoning the world.
Right.
Now, I honestly can't say if I think that is meant to be tragic or empowering. I wish I could say, but I honestly, and probably
Well, I
that's
think the
just because,
film intends it as empowering.
Okay,
I'm not arguing
yeah.
for it. I just think that's what the film
Yeah.
intends.
Which I think is fascinating because, to me, because that the film sees that as an empowering moment, it is not indicting the industry.
Right.
In my mind, it's not indicting the industry, or it's not indicting this world if it sees her taking back her sense of self as and that's essentially what she's doing. She's taking back her sense of self by creating a new false identity.
Right.
And I don't often say this about these films, but when I say these films, the films that we cover, but that is a choice I distinctly disagree with. And
Sure.
that's as much as I can put it to that end, is she takes back her sense of agency by creating a new false identity, and I consider that to be a further propitiation of your examination of a digital double, this false self, this putting forth a false self for whatever ends, by whatever means. And so I disagree with her character's choice at that point. If that is meant to be an empowering moment, it did not strike me as such. Maybe it's because I'm a male. Maybe it's because of my feelings about the industry. I'm not sure, but
Sure.
that was a choice on the character's part that I disagreed with. Whereas when she was able to destroy the digital double and was able to delete the account, I was very much kind of, look at what it cost her to get to this point.
Right.
But her mother making her up and putting her back out into the, I do not find it insignificant that her mother helps her do this, that her mother helps her get back into it now that her mother knows what she's doing. So I don't feel that the film is really indicting the industry in which she operates as much as the stealing of somebody's work and the theft of somebody's personhood. And so I feel at that point that it's complicated because it's a world that is completely oblivious to me. And so maybe I should acknowledge that as well.
Yeah. I think there's another hour's worth of conversation to be had there because
Right.
Because it's interesting. I'm reflecting on your very cogent note, the movie, the characters within the movie pass no judgment on her sort of behavior and or her sort of getting caught in the web of this kind of industry that would facilitate her being able to do this. I'm thinking right. About hear me, it's funny, I'm going to make this metaphor and then it's going to be like, well, what movies are referring to? I really don't know. But I think about, the story of someone getting out of the burlesque dancer or something getting out
Right.
of that world. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's the typical version of that story. But I also, this is where I just sometimes feel just ill-equipped to have this particular version of conversation is okay, well, is that story written by some dude, who wants the, kind of more hooker with a heart of gold type of thing? I don't know.
Yeah,
There's just
right.
there are a lot of angles on this story that I'm not privy to. I do agree with you. It is difficult, our sort of traditionally moralistic standpoint, which I don't mean is a traditionalistic version of morality, but just what we would sort of lean into as our prism would say, hey, there's a better way to do life than this. And
Absolutely.
But this movie doesn't position that way,
No, it doesn't. And and I'm sorry I cut you off.
No.
I keep wanting to wind down, and these things are rising up in me. It has been, the psychologists, objective, non-moralistic studies have proven that saturation in observing this material and engaging in this material will rewire your neurological pathways.
Sure.
You will find it difficult to have healthy relationships in the real.
Right.
Regardless of casting aside, and why I think this is a valid sort of feminist statement, is the ways in which a woman can exert her agency in this capacity, and men will be submissive and pliant to what she's attempting to do. And so in that way, I can understand why someone would see that as empowering. I do understand that. The problem that I deal with is in the actual charted effects that the long-term association with this industry has had, both on people who are physically involved in it and people who engage in it and in a
Sure.
in an exorbitant way.
Right.
I mean, again, not religious studies, psychological studies have said you will find it difficult to have normal, healthy relationships if you engage in this kind of thing at an exorbitant degree. And I can't ignore that in the conversation about this film, as much as I want to sort of champion her reclaiming of herself. The final beat of the film just won't let me do that. And maybe ultimately, if somebody's listening to this and they feel differently about it, maybe ultimately I just have to chalk it up to maybe I just don't get it, and maybe I don't. But that's my perspective on what the film delivered for me, is that she appears to be taking back her sense of self. But to me, it was tragic in the sense that the only way to do that was to create a new false identity. And even says, I think in the film, if the same thing happens, what if we get copied again? We'll just make another one. It will never stop.
Right.
It will never stop. And I find that to be somewhat tragic. Sorry to end on a bit of a dour note, but like,
well,
but,
I mean, this is a movie with a very particular vantage point that it's trying to paint.
Yeah.
And that vantage point is rooted in a very particular economic strain of the very real world. And so it's hard it's hard to sort of set aside our real world kind of feelings in favor of just taking it on its own. So no, well, in the spirit of that, do we feel like heading to the fog meter? I mean,
yes, we should. Before we dive back into this subject, we should go ahead and head into the fog meter. Yes, exactly.
For fog's sake, let's do it. So yes, every week we discuss or rather the films we discuss, we put through a series of highly considered numeric probabilities and algorithms of our own to create a rating that is new for 2019, that of the fog meter. And we rate it on two columns, one of fear, per the title of our podcast. Fear, so how scary a thing is, and God, or how substantive a thing is. I'll start with my fear column here, and knowing that I put Bird Box at a 3, I'm going to give Cam like a 7. This is a very discomforting, very kind of upsetting, in some aspects, very scary film.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I am going to give this, on the pure fear measurement, a lot of this is my own personal proclivities, a 9.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
I'm giving it a 9. I had to watch most of this film sort of disconnecting.
Blindfolded?
Yeah, kind of. Metaphorically blindfolded, kind of, staying engaged enough to follow the plot of what was happening, but disengaged enough so that it was not, eliciting too much emotion for me. I had to watch it guarded, as it were. So,
I think that's fair. What about for substance for you?
For the substance, I mean, I really do feel like this is a case where I feel like this film really has something to say, and I think it says it well. Simply because I disagree with what it's saying would not be merit enough for me to detriment my rating of the film for that. So I'm going to land on the sort of substance meter, or what we're calling the God meter, on a 6, because I feel like it really is saying some things very intentionally and deliberately. I just happen to disagree with some of the conclusions I feel that the film is making.
See, oh man, I'm going to sound like such a. I've tried so hard to be kind of not puritanical this conversation, but I think for me that I'm not sure. I think the scary aspect of it is its strength. I'm worried that the movie. I'm worried that Alice doesn't learn anything.
Yeah, me too.
And from that standpoint, the substance meter gets reduced because, which oh God, it sounds like I'm saying like, well, if she'd just leave her life of sin, that's not really what I'm trying to say.
No.
I'm just trying to say like you're saying, she just resets and reboots and in fact becomes less herself than she even was at the start.
Yeah, right.
You know, so I think in terms of the substance factor, I'm going to go with a 4. And
Okay.
even saying that, part of me pings like I'm being judgmental, and I don't want to be per se. I just think there's ultimately not a lot of there. It's a very interesting slice of human story.
No, absolutely.
That tackles things in a really provocative way, but I don't know that it ultimately says a ton.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying there. Well, that means that on the fog meter for Cam, we give it 6.5 out of 10 on the fog meter, which is still.
I think that's pretty good for the fog meter.
Absolutely, the fog
meter is not kind. Yeah.
It's not. It's really not. So 6.5 out of 10 for Cam. But this is, sort of the addendum to that is, do you think you would recommend this film, just in general?
You love to split hairs on the recommendation.
I do.
I think as a scary movie, absolutely. I think it's legit unnerving, distressing, scary for probably the bulk of our audience and maybe even ourselves in hindsight. Not really. It's very difficult to sort of, and maybe if in the end of it she had learned a little bit more, I don't know what would have made that, but it is not one I'm going to be like, oh God, you got to go watch it.
Yeah. Well, I'll take sort of what you're dancing in, and I'll just dive right into the deep with it. Had this film ended with her not going back into it, I probably would give a cautionary recommendation of the film. As it is, that's not how the film ends, and because of the ending of the film, and because I can't quite grasp whether or not, as you put it, Alice learns anything, I find it very difficult to recommend this film. It's exceptionally well made.
Yeah.
And I have to say that this has nothing to do with the film craft at work. It's exceptionally well made, impeccably performed. It's very tightly paced. It is really a very well made film. I just have such reservations and such disagreements with some of what it leaves us with that I would find it difficult to recommend this film. So it's a no for me on the recommendations. Not because the film isn't well made, but because it's just what it has to say.
Well, on that note, Reed, that is
there it is.
Installment number 5 of Netflix and Chills, a winding, uncomfortable path of conversation.
Indeed.
For 2 boys brought up in the Southern church.
So true. So next week will be very different.
Because, I've got Sandra Bullock screaming in my head, like, don't you look or you will die. And I'm like, but it's for the show. And she's like, don't look.
I have to. She's like, don't you take off your blindfold.
Oh, God.
But so next week, in something that is a bit unprecedented for the fear of God, we are actively going to be watching 2 different movies and talking about them in conversation. Because next week, for our final installment of hashtag Netflix and Chills, we are actually going to be covering the latest installment of Black Mirror, the film Bandersnatch. We are going to watch it and confer on the pod about what we watched. And as you know, that film is a different experience for everybody. So join us next week and see how that shakes up when we cover hashtag Netflix and Chills ultimate installment, Black Mirror's Bandersnatch. Nathan, thank you so much.
That's a lot you just said. I'm proud of you for getting to it.
I appreciate it, because I didn't get through it the first time, actually.
Hey, Reed, we can breathe. We're done. We're done talking about Cam.
It's finished.
It's good. Yeah.
All right. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Nathan, thank you for having this conversation with me. Thank you
You're
for
welcome,
always
brother.
being willing to have tough conversations with me. I mean,
sincerely. You're welcome.
And
on that note,
yes, we will see you guys next week.
See you guys. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but it is not the end of the conversation. You can continue this conversation in a variety of ways. On Twitter, @TheFearOfGod. On Instagram, @FearOfGodPodcast. You can like or follow us on Facebook or join the Fear of God Facebook discussion group. Follow Reed on Twitter at Reed Lackey and Nathan at The Nathan Rouse. Email us at fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com or visit morethanonelesson.com to comment on the official episode posts. And lastly, if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating or a review. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.
Hi, everybody.
For our final installment of hashtag Netflix and Chills, for our final installment of hashtag... I guess I couldn't do it. And don't laugh over top of me so I can do it right.